All right, everyone, our lucky listeners, as my co-host Omar Henderson has coined, lucky listeners. We find you guys to be lucky, and we find ourselves to be lucky that we're talking and you're listening. And you're listening to Not Your Common Conversation. And we wanted to give a brief intro into this. We've got a little bit of feedback. Omar, bring us up to speed.
All right, so this is a continuation of the last conversation that we had with Vance Gragg over the Palestinian-Israeli issue. And today we brought back Vance.
Yeah.
And then we brought in Phil Larson. Now, why Vance? Why do we bring him in?
Well, I know Vance. Let me say this. As I said, and you were here in the podcast, Vance is a developer in the DMV area, although he might develop all over the world. But he's a developer, building property developer of Gragg and Cardona Partners. They do amazing work. He's a friend that got introduced from a mutual friend of ours, and I find him to be really a good thinker. He's also a former attorney. I guess you're always an attorney, and also a former university professor. And I find him to be a smart, thought-provoking, and pretty like his own thinker. You know, I find him to be. He's not necessarily bound to any way of thinking other than his own independent thoughts, and that's something that I really I lean into.
What I notice about Vance is that he tends to ask a lot of questions that draw conclusions, or actually the questions that he asks support his point of view. He'll ask other people questions, expecting them to come to the conclusion that he's already arrived at in his head.
And I guess that's, part of his attorney hat, businessman, father, husband, grandfather. He's just that guy, right. That challenges thoughts. But I think he does it in a very smart way and a very enrolling way for some. Some people, it could feel a little prickly or could feel suspicious or what have you. And then Phil. So why did you bring Phil to the show?
Okay, so I brought Phil to the show because Phil is, to me, he represents the other side. Not only is he like, I'm African American, he's white, but also he's Republican. And though nowadays I don't identify hard with one side or the other, there's still a point of view over there that I don't necessarily agree with, but I'm open to hear about. And then Phil is very connected to a lot of information through, I want to say, alternative news sources, not mainstream. And when I say mainstream, I'm not only thinking about CNN and MSNBC, I'm including Fox in there just as well.
Oh, yeah, he's definitely... All right, I've heard him side the way of Fox.
Well, he sided the way of Fox, but he's drifted away from listening to Fox as a main source.
Sure.
He's gotten more into alternative yet right-wing news sources. Not only that, he's a history buff, specifically around Roman history.
Yeah.
So, that kind of puts him in a position of being inquisitive about American history.
Sure.
And so he's a student of that. And one of Phil's outstanding traits is he's a wordsmith. And so he will hear a word and then consider all the dimensions in which that word can be applied. And then almost, how can I say this? And not to slight him, but almost it's like the word then puts you in a maze. Not amazing, but in a maze.
Like a matrix.
Yeah, exactly. He's able to he'll take words and really investigate the words. So, which is interesting because between the two of them, you have Vance who asks, and I'm going to say leading questions.
Yeah.
And you have Phil who likes to spin words all right, or open them up to
Sure.
other alternative meetings, the two of them together make for a great mix.
Yeah, I think he as well is his own thinker. I mean, everybody is influenced by something. Let's not be crazy. Everybody, derives from whatever story they want to side with. But I think him as a sort of opposing sometimes opposing viewpoint, I think adds to the conversation. Like if we're just in a room and everybody's agreeing, that I don't think that there's necessarily much growth in that. And so to have someone who has his own thoughts, not necessarily in line with me or Omar or Vance or whomever guests we have on here, adds to, I think, the conversation. So I thought it wise for him to come on and talk to us and talk to Vance. And you'll hear them, have their opposing views, I guess. So yeah, I think that it just made for interesting conversation. So, take a listen. You might agree, you might disagree, but please do listen. Tell a friend, like us, download us. This episode particularly is going to be on YouTube as well, most of it anyway. And so check it out and keep listening.
All right, you lucky listeners. Go out and make some more lucky listeners.
There you go. Exactly. I love it.
All right. Share, like, and follow. Thank you.
All right. Here we are, another episode of Not Your Common Conversation. And we're back here with my co-host, Omar Henderson. I'm
Hello,
Chris
you
Downing.
Lucky listeners.
Lucky listeners. And we are here again. This is part 2, I would call it. Vance, well, we've had Phil on, I think episode 5. This is episode 7, but we had Vance on episode 6. And Vance, you were laying out, tell us what you were laying out.
Well, I'm trying to remember now.
I know, right?
I remember.
Well, let me just say this. Vance is developer, lawyer, former
University professor.
University professor.
Right.
Like I said, friend. Phil, historian. I think both of you guys have a touch of historian.
Yeah, for sure.
But no, specifically
Well, I like Roman history, Western civilization, and I'm an amateur, an armchair historian.
Okay, all right.
In case any real historian
A
didn't
little
listen. Now.
disclaimer. That's fine.
Yeah, we got some in the back
remember
room.
now.
You
To
remember?
fact check.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
So I think
get us close. I want you a little tighter on the mic.
not a problem.
Okay. And I remember what you were leading up to.
Yeah.
Vance.
You do now?
Yeah.
As well?
Well,
I'll
yeah.
give you a shot at it first.
All right. So what you were leading up to was, and the question was, of what interest do we have in the Middle East?
I have a different recollection.
You have a different
Maybe a
recollection.
different way.
Yeah.
And what I think where we left it, or where we tried to leave it, was that as human beings, as individuals, we go through our life, for our peculiar motivations, right? And peculiar relationships. But we are also part of something larger in a society, and that in that society, there are people who we don't know sometimes, some we do, who have their interest. And this, what we were talking about, some of the major world events or events within the United States, that those interests are hard at work pursuing their interest. Mm-hmm. In that sometimes those interests in many cases require the support of the population, whether it be through taxes, whether it be through emotional support, whether it be through intellectual support. So they attempt to influence other people, you and I. Mm-hmm. And I think where we left it was, who are those people, if that's a question that it can even be answered, But what are those interests?
Yeah.
Right?
What are those interests? Exactly.
And that we as individuals have to try to be careful to the extent of our capacities to be cognizant of that reality of interest and therefore navigate that territory in ways that protect us and our interest and those who we care about.
Well, Vance, interesting. Can you explain what you mean by interests and how that relates to people?
Sure. I don't know if I can fully explain it, but I would just try to give examples. I mean, we have an interest in food. We have an interest in security. We have an interest in love. Some people have an interest in power. I don't think people have multiple interests, right?
You think they do have multiple?
I think we, as human beings, have multiple interests.
Right.
We have a hierarchy of interest. Right? So we're complex social creatures.
Gotcha.
But
So,
those interests usually revolve around personal security, power within a social structure, and survival. However one might define that.
Right. And it's funny because I agree, interest is like attention. I mean, interest requires attention, and attention requires sort of the desire to attend to something. It's a motivation thing. I mean, you're motivated for your survival. It's a human nature thing for you to care about your survival. It's a human requirement to eat and food and so forth. And then you mentioned something that was a little out of that world, and that was this interest in power in a structure. Because automatically you've just gone from the personal to a thing that involves others, right? This power structure, this system is created by us. I mean, it exists. We exist in it, and it has a piece of all of us in it, and we have a piece of ourselves in the structure. So we have interests in that structure.
What structure are you referring to?
Well, when you mentioned you have an interest in power, right? There are, and what does power mean? Power presumes that if you are
we can use a less inflamed word. We can just say control.
I like,
You think control is better?
Control is
over a system. Over a system.
I think it's interesting. You should say, I think control is more befitting because it's a human tendency to, how can I say, to discover something about how to live and then want to
make it better.
Well, not make it better, but make sure that
that it comes to pass.
That you learn it, and that you learn it, and that Ahmad learns it, and that everybody learns it, because why? I don't know. I mean, I could dig deeper and say that it has something to do with feeling validated, but for some reason or another.
There might be, validation might be part of it, but allow me to suggest that I like to think of these things in terms of the small and then to the large.
Right. Well, when you get to power, though, that's kind of like...
Well, no. I would suggest that it starts at the small.
Huh. Okay. Because I could see that connection. But go on.
Because we have to go backwards to some extent. We live in a planet today of almost, I believe, 9 billion people. I could be off on that.
It's definitely 8.
Right.
Moving
up. But it wasn't always like that.
Right.
At least not to our best knowledge. Maybe it was at one time, and it all went away, and it's come back again. But to the best of our knowledge that we're comfortable with today, we live under the belief of a history where mankind started out at a much lower population, and that people lived within bands, or BANDS, clans, tribes, very small to start with. And so we're social animals. And from that, I shouldn't say that in a conclusory fashion like that, but it is accepted that the human being is a social animal.
Right.
That we cannot exist one person by ourselves.
Right.
We can't even procreate. We're not asexual. So we cannot produce ourselves without a relationship with at least one more human being. And then the new human being cannot survive independently. Some can. For example, a cow can be born and within 10 hours or something, or 15 hours, it could be up and running, but it would still need its mother for the milk. But there are some animals that can actually swim away from birth or move away from birth, from that birth experience, and be independent. The human being's not one of them. So we're a social animal. Now, I'm only saying, to make the point, that everything that exists at a large scale, at the 9 billion level, had to exist first almost in its roots at the tribe level, right? And so when you move to the 9 billion level, the question is, what's the relationship of the 9 billion to what still exists, which is the family unit, or that social network that every human being up to some point is limited to, until you begin to exercise control beyond, if that's your aspiration, beyond that physical limit, and you start exercising control, kind of leveraging something to exercise control over larger and larger groups of people who actually you don't really know. You don't know the people that you're controlling. Right?
Yeah. But you're controlling them
for something.
For an interest, right?
For an interest.
Yeah. Okay. Now we're hitting.
So some of the listeners, lucky listeners, might be wondering, what does this have to do with? I think we were outlining what's happening in Israel, Gaza, this recent bombing of Israel, of Hamas, and the whole story behind it. Mm-hmm. Because everybody's got a lot to say about it over here in the U.S. And I think that's a big question mark. Speaking of interest, what interest does the U.S. have? Because I bring that up because we're so always quick to come to the.
Well, yeah, that's funny
to find. Hang on. To come to the scene with our tax dollars. By the way,
Vance started the podcast last week with this idea that we're 6,000 miles from Israel, so why are we there?
Yeah, he did. That's glad
exactly.
You brought that up.
And I thought to myself, driving over here, I thought to myself, as we're reviewing that, I said, oh, no, I can find that connection 10 minutes from this house. I can go down and find a Palestinian pro-Hamas parade or protest.
They were protesting right here this morning when I went out.
It's not 6,000 miles. It's about 3,000 feet. That's how close it is.
Well, that's interesting because one precludes the other, which is precluded by something else. So, I mean, back in 1940, there was nobody marching in the streets for Palestine, but all of a sudden in 48, now we have this interest of establishing or helping or supporting the establishment of Israel for the good of the American people. Because, I remember even having conversations with you where you would say, well, they're an ally of the United States. Okay. So what is that? What does that mean? What interest does that serve?
I mean, we know what it means, but the interest.
Specifically.
Ally.
And it's funny because I keep going back to this thought about the word interest. The United States has an interest in Israel and the Hamas.
Well, maybe put it another way. What's the motivation?
There's nothing wrong with the word interest. It needs to be explored.
Yes. What is the motivation?
Right. The interest. Why are we interested in Israel as an ally? Why are we interested in having allies?
Correct.
Right. What is an ally?
And before we go to that, there's if I may, I think we have to ask ourselves, how do we get into the phrase of, for example, when we talk about these things, meaning in this room, there's 4 of us plus the crew who's helping produce it. You're using the word why do we have an interest?
We being Americans.
Sorry, I'd like you to delve into that.
Well, absolutely.
What is the we?
That's the beautiful thing about conversation. Every word you bring up has the connections. He's got an idea
because
about
if we start that, we're down a certain road. The only reason I ask it is because Not that you're wrong. I'm not saying you're wrong.
Oh no, but it needs to be.
Why
it
are
needs
we?
to be pulled
How do
apart.
we get into
Absolutely.
using that language?
Yeah.
We.
Yeah. We.
First, let's
yeah,
start.
Right.
Let's ask a question.
Who's we?
And let's
Well,
ask.
I think we, and that's good.
That's so
That's
funny.
good. We, because being geographically where we're positioned,
Right.
I happen to be born in the U.S., right? So by
right.
default,
I'm a
because
US
I,
citizen.
at some point I'm conforming.
What you mean we?
What you mean, we know, we've heard that
That's
one.
a great joke.
Yeah, what you
We won't
mean,
tell it,
we?
will we?
That's so well put.
By the way, Phil, I didn't mean for you to be over there all by yourself. I just realized the dynamic.
No, it gives me a sight right on the.
Hey, look,
right on the.
we're all in
thumbs
front of you.
We're working with.
But that's something to take apart, like you said, Phil. We, what makes us we and them?
Well, Vance brought the we.
I asked
different
the we
location up.
because, it was a leading question, because in my mind, we, there, as it relates to what Chris put on the table, Palestine, Israel, / the Middle East. What's going on there? I have no power over in concept. I don't sell guns. I don't ship bombs. I don't send money.
Not the
I don't know anybody who's physically there. In my mind, there's a government of the United States, right? I'm a citizen in the United States. To me, in my mind, that's not automatically a we, right?
No.
Okay.
No. What we are you not a part of?
No, I didn't use the word I wasn't a part of. I said it's not automatically a we. The fact that the government of the United States does something, and let's be very particular, internationally, is not automatically for me a we, meaning I'm not automatically part of it, except, as Chris to say, at a base level to start with. Chris, you used the word taxes.
Yeah.
And use the word citizenship.
If we're paying taxes, and I use the word citizenship.
Yeah.
Right.
But I do want to just say as a side, we're beyond taxes.
Right.
Meaning, that's a side note, but there's no taxes paying for this. The United States federal government is so underwater it would freak you out.
Oh,
if
that's
you really
right.
knew the numbers.
So where is the money coming from?
Wait a minute.
Yeah.
So how is it? Wait a minute. That's a whole nother conversation, man.
Yeah.
So wait a minute. Well, hold on a second. But my understanding is that come March 15th, if I don't pay my taxes, then I'm going to sink or Israel's going to sink. One or the other.
Well, you see,
and more than likely it's going to be me.
Well, that's
part
April
of the narrative.
15th. Okay.
Oh, whatever.
But see, that's part of the narrative. The truth of the matter is, and I'm not, a member of the Federal Reserve or anything like that.
Right.
But quite frankly, every American alive who's supposed to pay taxes could pay zero. It wouldn't make a damn bit of difference now.
Whoa.
Okay?
Oh, my gosh.
The amount of money that is spent annually in excess of taxes, and has been going on for a long time.
I think it's a 1.5 trillion this year.
In
a $4 trillion budget. So about 30% is actually money out of nothing.
Nothing. And
Yeah,
so
that's-
it's way underwater.
You're suggesting we could not pay any taxes.
We could not pay any taxes. It wouldn't make a difference.
They just add another one to the bank account.
Well, it's funny because
we're operating now on what he said. In theory, out of nothing.
Yeah.
But it's essentially a fiat currency system. In its hand is way overplayed, and they're trying to sort it out. And I only raise it because it ties into interest. Okay.
Yeah, it's funny
because you really have to ask the question. Mm-hmm. If you're broke as what do they call it? What's the one
hobo?
Of the old sayings? If you're broke as a hobo, I hadn't heard that one before. I like it though. If a nation is broke as a hobo, and this is not the first time this happened in history, as broke as a hobo, how is it become a national priority to go further broke, right?
Right.
Deeper into the hole.
Deeper, yeah.
Shipping your money, you're paying for somebody else's, unless it's not really somebody else's. Maybe it, you know what I'm saying? It gets really confusing.
Right, it does.
What's going on here?
Right.
Right? Go ahead, Phil.
Well, yeah, I mean, okay, so you took exception with, you're right, my conception of we is particular to me.
Yes.
Right, and you're right, I approve of very little the government's doing at the moment. and I'm not too keen on giving $1 billion of Israel, except I am keen on Israel winning the war with Hamas.
Now, that's interesting.
That's a discussion.
We'll have to get to that.
How is that important to me?
Yes.
Well, in many ways, and maybe we'll get to those. But in order for Israel to win that war, in theory, some banker here needs to tell some banker over there that weapons dealer is allowed to sell the weapons to this guy.
Right.
But that's all right, because the Hamas got their bankers who were dealing with their weapons dealers who were their bankers. So it's a big banking war at this point, I suppose, at some level.
Oh, my God. Wow.
That's interesting.
On so many levels. That's so interesting. Yeah, well, I was always under the impression, and that's why I called my senators yesterday and called my congressman a few weeks ago and said that I want my tax dollars going to an equitable, prosperous solution for both sides, not a one-handed...
Did he ask you what that was?
No. Well, you never get to talk to them directly, so you leave messages. But, and I called Cardin and what's his face?
Shapiro? Not Shapiro.
No, not Shapiro. They're two Maryland senators.
Yeah, he used to be a McCulsey.
Ben Cardin
with him last Sunday.
And
how do we not know our own senators?
I know,
I used to.
Yeah. Oh my God! Did I have a problem finding that out?
Oh, really? You couldn't Google Maryland senators?
Well, I eventually did, right? But on the way there, I thought to myself, well, there's got to be a state, like, you have the state House of Delegates as well. And I assume that our state elected representatives were talking to the federal level elected representatives.
Well, yeah, in theory they might.
Yeah. So so after so many times of having to, number one, rediscover what district I'm in and find out who the representative was, which was not an easy task.
Oh, you wanted to find who your local rep was.
Exactly.
That
exactly.
is tougher. Yeah.
Because you have a state senator and then you have the senator that's on Capitol Hill, right?
Correct.
So, I go through all this process and it was just a fiasco. As a matter of fact, the numbers that they have posted for the House of Representatives in the state of Maryland take you to some other service. And I called the lady and said, they gave me this number, but I got your office. And she said, yep, that's the number that's listed. That's wrong, blah, blah, blah. Nonetheless, I finally got around to calling Cardin and calling the other senator.
You want them to solve world peace, but you couldn't figure out who they were.
Right.
So coming back to interest.
Yes.
If we may.
Yeah.
What kind of interest?
The
Bank
big
interest
$14 billion question.
Well, I mean, I'm just
Oh,
sitting,
that's
I'm
what
just, I'm
that
just
was
sitting
my
here
point.
thinking.
I told him I don't want that 14 because it's going to Congress.
Right.
So and Congress has to get it approved by the Senate.
Yes.
So I'm like, no. You heard, I voted for you, and I'm telling you no.
There are better things you'd like that $4 billion out of
14.
nothing. 14 billion to be done.
Let's throw out some conceptual interests because we started off earlier.
Yeah. What could the
talking
interest
about
be?
what are interests, and I know I was talking very basically about food and shelter and things like that.
Right.
But maybe we can come up to a higher level.
Yeah, sure. I'm game.
So there's such thing as selfish interest. There's such things as community interest. There's such things as financial interest. There's such things as moral/spiritual interest. I've thrown out a few.
See, and
Right.
interest sounds like an abstraction.
Yeah, that's why I wanted to try to bring it in.
Yeah.
Right.
And selfish interest, I guess, maybe you could tell me what a selfish interest is. I mean, if there's a limited amount of food and we're competing for it,
Yes.
me eating before you guys
correct.
is a selfish interest. You
That's
eating
correct.
before me is a selfish interest.
Well, maybe I shouldn't use the word selfish. Let's just back that back and just say self-interest. So you're correct.
Right.
If it came down to the last piece of bread between us,
And we were,
I would be very tempted. I'll take responsibility for that.
Right.
Right? To selfishly take it for myself.
Selflessly.
Yeah.
Because me being alive is better than you.
Right. I don't know if I would even go through that process, right? It would simply be an unchained, human instinct.
And I would like to make a claim about interest.
Right.
I would say to you that the bread that you're giving up today for another is predicated on possibility that maybe tomorrow there will be 2 pieces of bread. So when we talk about interest, self-interest, often we try to create a situation where we know we eat tomorrow. It's nice to know you can eat today, but we often find ourselves trying to figure out how we make sure we eat tomorrow and the day after. And that's where this national self-interest comes into play.
Okay, so now we come to national interest.
If the nation suffers terribly, we all don't eat tomorrow and the day after and so forth.
Okay, so
it's in our interest to eat.
Would you prefer that we then not prefer, taking your direction, which I like, we could ask the question, is it in the national interest of the United States? What are the national interest of the United States
to give $14 billion to Israel?
Well, just broaden it out. What potential national interest could the United States have in
a strong and powerful
controversy, what appears to be a controversy between the nation of Israel and the community of Palestinians who are adjacent to it?
What's our national interest in that? Well, I mean, at minimum to
what are the interests of the United States?
Yeah, our national self-interest is in the stability of the world. I mean, and of course, we're in the middle of a car crash globally. So, to argue about whether or not we should crash this direction or that direction.
So you said the one potential interest, is the stability of the world.
Tomorrow's piece of bread for you and I.
Oh, but I just want to go.
No, that's
you raise it above the bread level. You said the stability of the world.
Bring the conversation someplace that we know. We know ourselves. Do we care about tomorrow's bread? And the answer is yes. The question is, how do we guarantee tomorrow's bread?
But you said the stability of the world.
Yeah, that impacts tomorrow's bread.
Okay, and how is the stability of the world
impacted by Israel's demise?
Affected by the controversy between the nation state of Israel and the community. Notice I'm not saying nation state. The community of Palestinian peoples located adjacent to it.
Okay, it sounds like you're trying to isolate the problem we're dealing with to a subset. And the subset is 2 communities. So if the question is how do you help 2 communities, then I guess that's a good conversation.
No. I really want to get to, from your perspective. And I'm not saying your perspective is wrong.
Hamas.
I'm saying how is the stability of the world?
I got you. I believe Hamas and the Palestinians intend to eradicate the state of Israel, and that probably means to kill, eject, exile as many of the Israeli population as exists. Now, if that occurs, then that would cause. I believe it would cause shockwaves to the
I happen
the
to
global
agree
system.
with you. I happen to agree with you. Now, I mean on your shockwave part.
I think that shockwave can go either way.
No, well, wait. Listen, before we get there, if I may.
But what's the event? The Hamas get decimated or the Israelis?
Please let's back up before we get the car engine revved up. My question would be, I just want to work with what you put on the table because I think it's a lot to work with. How would, in your mind, based on your knowledge, and I'm not saying you're the CIA or anything like that, people have more knowledge than us, but you do have a certain position, and I'm not saying I don't share it, I just want to understand it. How would the community of Palestinians / Hamas, what leads you to believe that they have the capacity to kill, as you described, every Israeli and bring the end to the nation of Israel?
Well, that's a good question, and that's an interesting question.
But no, that was an interesting statement.
How would that happen? I guess it could happen.
No. How?
Well, that's a question, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not that it could happen. I'm just want to try to understand.
Right. Okay.
You give me the possibilities of how that can happen.
Right. I threw up the possibility that if we don't do something, then,
That's
then
right.
this event
that
will
would
occur.
happen.
And you're saying, how can that occur? And yeah, that's a good question.
No, the reason I asked it, and again, you could be right. From what I understand, and I was in that region of the world a little while ago. I did not go to Palestine, though, or Israel. What I understand, and from what I'm watching on TV, and it could all be fake, by the way. I'm saying that sarcastically.
Today.
but I don't think it's fake. What I understand is that there's approximately 2 million something people who identify as Palestinians.
Mm-hmm.
In the particular case we're talking about, the, quote, Gaza Strip, they've been in prison there.
I object to that word prison.
Okay, well, I'll take that back. They've been locked up for 20 years. Literally.
How are they locked up?
They can't go in and out of Gaza.
Without the permission of Israel.
Exactly. There's a wall.
There's fences, walls, military cameras, guns, machine guns, etc.
They can go into Egypt.
No.
They can go into Lebanon.
No.
They can
cannot.
go to sea.
No,
they cannot.
No, they can't.
This might be a
they
surprise
can't go to
you.
sea.
But all of those which you just described, and you're correct, those physical proximities exist that you just described. Every one of them is monitored by the nation of Israel. And at the risk of death as a Palestinian locked up in Gaza, you cannot do any of the things you just said.
They can go into Israel. Many
No.
Palestinians work in
under
Israel.
work permits, and I don't want to spend a lot of time on this.
Well, you can't go to Mexico without a permit.
Under permits, you're correct. They can enter Israel to work. Okay, but let's get to the killing that you talked about and the eradication of Israel. I'm trying to figure out how that's going to happen, or how it even could happen. If these people, outside a few of them, I think estimated at 30,000 or so.
What, Hamas?
Quote,
the number
Hamas. That's the number that Israel provides. That there's 30,000 or so Hamas militants.
How
right?
about Hamas supporters in Palestine?
Okay, but I'm saying to kill everybody in a nation state that's armed to the teeth, you would have to have something to do it with. Let's just get to the point.
Actually, Israel has some of the toughest gun control laws in the world.
I got it. But they also have the largest military stockpile of arms and army in the entire Middle East. So the only reason I'm going down this road, and we can move.
I think Turkey has a million men under arms. I think Israel might have 300,000. That includes reserves.
Well, that's more than the 30,000 Hamas people. That's 10 times the amount. I'm really down to guns and bullets. Because you can't kill anybody unless you choke them to death, cut them to death, shoot them to death, bomb them to death, which we're seeing happening on TV. You got to have the ability to do it. The only reason I'm going down this road is that this type of concept, I think, manipulates us into to be vulnerable to being controlled by others. Meaning, if something isn't possible, but somebody is telling us it is, then they're trying to manipulate us. If I say to you, hey, Phil, I'm moving out of this neighborhood tomorrow because tomorrow morning there's an army coming that's going to kill me and my family. And you say, well, Vance, what the hell are you talking about?
Right.
I live next door to you. I know no such shit going down.
Right.
Could you, fill me in a little bit more? Because I might want to leave too.
Right.
So we're being told, you too, Phil, honestly, that what we're watching or in interest of the United States, which you started out with, is stability in the area. And that stability could be upset if the Palestinians killed all the Israelis. And I'm simply saying, is that even possible? I'm not against it being in the national interest yet.
Vance, you got it. You got to.
You see how I'm saying how we can get messed over?
Well, I think part of the problem is this the idea
we can get driven
instability. Instability is being driven by many things. I mean, the smallest.
Okay, so are we beyond the Palestinians wiping out the Israelis? Let's pick another.
Well,
approach.
which war do you want? Okay, so your argument is that the Palestinians are it's impossible for the Palestinians to wage war against Israel.
No, I didn't say that. I said it's impossible
to win the war
for the Palestinians to kill every last Israeli and bring the state of Israel to an end. It's an impossibility.
And I say, no, it's not.
Okay, why not?
Well, I mean, at minimum, what will be...
I said by killing them.
I think right now...
I said by killing them. I didn't say it was impossible for the Palestinians to bring this... Now, notice, we're getting interesting here.
Your question is whether or not you can actually kill all the Jews.
No. I'm getting into something...
And I would say to you, they tried that.
No, I'm getting into something else.
They did a pretty good job.
I'm getting into something else, quite frankly. And that is...
I'm trying to be short, man.
And that is...
I've got to get to the point.
Thank you. And that is, there is a way for the Palestinians, or that conflict that we're watching, to bring the state of Israel to the absolute end. Might not be today, but it will happen. And you know how?
Go ahead.
Exactly what we're watching. Meaning, there's no way on this earth in the history of mankind that anybody can wantonly murder over and over and over again women and children and defenseless men, women, and children forever without ending their own society.
And you mean that on the part of both of them?
Palestinians you asked me?
And Israelis.
I'm saying that is the end.
Right. And I think many people are on that branch. This is not working.
And the end will be because of a moral matter. Meaning a society cannot survive, a human being cannot be a human being, cannot exist in the world of humanity as a savage. They used to be able to exist 200,000 years ago, but humanity has evolved.
No, humanity hasn't evolved. Systems have evolved.
No.
Civilization has evolved. Culture has evolved.
Humanity has evolved.
Yeah, the people haven't evolved. I think our brains have gotten
We have
smaller.
evolved. We didn't start out.
I think we've.
No, we did not start out believing that human dignity, freedom of action, personal security.
That's not genetic. That's cultural.
I didn't say it was. It's culturally civilization. That's what I mean. Evolved.
Right. Culturally, we've evolved.
Yes.
Right. Gotcha.
And we've evolved to a state where we're
and not everybody. And when you say not everybody,
obviously, we're watching it.
There are so many cultures. There are so many points of views. Even in cultures,
but
you have to identify the people.
But you talked about stability, and that's why I'm glad we're into this territory.
It's about tomorrow's eats. You know.
Well, tomorrow's eats is secured, and I agree with you.
I honestly believe that that's a smokescreen.
But
what is that?
What's that?
That the whole security, in the region. I think.
Oh, you mean you're coming back to the region?
I'm coming back to the idea of what's the motivation?
What's the national interest?
What's the national interest?
Meaning, to put it another way,
stability sounds noble.
Let's explore it another way. I think stability.
It sounds noble to us, but you believe the population, right? And then we count on. I'm sorry. Let me just say. And then we count on the media to show us bombs going off, and then they show an Arab face, and all of a sudden that's what's unstable.
Correct.
It's interesting because one thing that I have noticed about being introduced to Islam and brought up, Muslim, one thing I do notice about, and I don't know if this is exclusive to anybody else, but the world of Arabs, they're quite vengeful. They are. As a matter of fact, it was an issue of the advent of the Prophet Muhammad. It's a practice of that society to be vengeful. So I like to quote a movie where the guy, was being invaded by these creatures. The West has stepped their foot in the wrong backyard. The wrong backyard.
Well, you're saying something interesting.
Because these people will never stop. It's a part of their culture.
Have you ever heard of the Hatfields and the McCoys?
The Hatfields and the McCoys. There you go.
And the only reason I raise that, and we go back to the civilization and stability, practically every human society I'm familiar with, once it grows beyond 10 people and there's another group across the river, right, that's not part of yours, has the capacity to be vengeful. Christianity, we can go to the Bible, warns against the destructiveness of vengeance and attempts to civilize that human instinct.
Okay.
Buddhism does the same thing. Hinduism does the same thing. Taoism, and many other philosophies. We are civilized by moral, spiritual values that then restrict our baser human instincts in order for us to survive.
Yeah, and that's...
But as societies become more complex, if I'm just having me, 3 wives, and 15 children, and 10 nephews and some grandparents, 25 in a tribe, and I got 1,000 square miles to exist in, and I'm living in a tent, we might get by with not such a complex religion. We're still going to have dreams. We're going to imagine the powers of the universe. We're going to look at the stars. But, we're going to kind of be just like at a base level. But the moment that populations continue to increase and we begin organizing more complexly to produce food, as Phil is saying, and shelter and things like that, we are prone to have tremendous savage violence unless there is a civilizing factor that controls the baser instinct and encourages and moves people toward cooperation and collaboration and peace in order for it to deliver stability.
Correct. And how does that story get told to a people with a story of quite the opposite?
Who?
Those that are behaving in the other way, who are behaving in a vengeful and hateful fashion. They need to have the same conception as you and I and you and you and you do about how to look at life.
Well, let's apply that to the circumstance we're talking about.
Yeah, and before you say that, then there is who stepped on whose foot first, and we could go down that rabbit hole.
And the story continues.
And the story continues. It just gets deeper and deeper and deeper,
Well, let's not go down that rabbit hole. Let's keep it at the higher level, because what we're witnessing is, I think I would at least put on the table, is not unprecedented and sadly is not unique. I mean, I know the last time we talked about Rwanda, we talked about Vietnam, Iraq, in our lifetime, so many instances.
Right.
We can go back to any place on earth, the Mongol invasions. We can look at the savagery of the Crusades. We can look at the tremendous violence that took place between Catholics and Protestants, throughout Europe, and the 100 Years' War, and all kinds of just bloodbaths, right? We are watching a bloodbath. Now, more coming back to then why this bloodbath is in the national interest of the United States. I want to continue to probe that.
If the Hamas voluntarily surrendered, there would be peace today.
Oh.
Okay, voluntarily surrendered what?
Themselves.
Okay, so let's start there. That if Hamas voluntarily surrendered, let's say all 30,000 people in Hamas walked out of the Gaza, turned their arms in, surrendered and were carted off to China, right? What next?
There would be peace.
Okay, so how would peace arrive? Because all we've had is a surrender of 30,000 admitted members
Well,
of Hamas.
there would be no more bombing, for instance. There would be no rockets from Hamas, and there would be no more counter bombs.
Okay, so you're saying there would be that's different than peace. You're saying there would be a pause in the bloodbath.
Ceasefire.
If the
Because that wouldn't produce
if
peace.
Hamas surrendered, there would be peace tomorrow, and they could have a state probably founded by next year.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Okay, well, if that's the case, and you
so
might,
easy.
and he might not be wrong.
It does sound easy.
He might not be wrong, but again, we're just
Question
little.
what stops
We're
that?
just little people in the room. Because by that calculation, and I know you don't mean to calculate it that way, so I'm just trying to draw it to our attention. Hamas is not an old-timer organization. Meaning, before there was a Hamas, there was
the
no
Muslim
peace.
Brotherhood.
PLO.
No. Before there was Hamas, there was no peace. Hamas has not always been
Right.
in the Palestinian community. There was the PLO.
Okay, well, if you have a bar fight and you eject the guys who are fighting, you now have peace.
But
that
I'm
doesn't
saying,
mean
no,
that there
no.
wasn't a bar fight yesterday, and it doesn't mean
But
there
I'm
will be
just
a
saying
bar
there
fight
was no
tomorrow.
peace
But
before Hamas.
There is peace right now.
But there was no peace before Hamas.
Right now, there is a hatred of the Jewish nation, and that is a story that is being fed like a fire.
Yeah.
So you're saying there's a hatred of the Jewish
It's good that you classified that as a story. It's
Yeah,
good.
Well, that's absolutely right, because story is what this is all about.
And who is that? Does I don't want to put anybody on the spot here.
What?
But
who believes that there's a hatred on the part of the Hamas?
I'm not saying there aren't people. I guess I know people who hate the United States. I know people who hate.
So what are you objecting
Nigeria.
to? You don't believe that if Hamas surrendered,
No.
there'd be peace tomorrow. I mean, that's. I get it. It's not. That will not probably happen.
That's
but
not only me who doesn't believe that. I'm simply saying to you there was no peace before Hamas.
The Gaza Strip is on the most fantastic location of the Mediterranean, which is probably the most fantastic location
Why do you
on the
think
entire
there's no
planet.
peace?
If the people of Palestine and Gaza dedicated themselves to the peaceful rebuilding of their society, they could make that just the Club Med at the beginning, and the most wonderful real estate in the world is right there on that seashore.
Okay, so let me give you a
They
scenario.
could have the most beautiful, wealthy,
Fantastic.
populous.
I think
this is the dream that's possible.
I got you.
And it might be right now that this dream can be born
Let
in
me
this
ask this,
conversation.
because I like you and anybody in this room.
All right, Phil.
I'm actually quite a believer in peace. So the question is, what are the elements of peace? And I think those elements are probably universal. But let me just ask a question, and anybody can. Let's probe this question. Tomorrow, Phil, I don't want to wish this on you, so maybe I'll say to myself, tomorrow, somebody comes to my home, comes in the front door, and at gunpoint puts me across the street, moves into my house with everything I have in there, right? Actually, they do leave me a tent, and they give me a tent to live across the street.
Across the street.
And tell me that I can't leave there without their permission. And they set up in my house, and they go on with their life. And that goes on for a number of years and decades. And
I think I get your point. Maybe I'll move it along.
Well, my
so now
point
you're
is
across the
that-
street and you're wishing you can move back in your
No, I'm
home.
not.
And you try for 50 years to move back, and you realize you're beat back every time. But you've lived in misery, suffering, squalor, and hate.
Can you take the
for
words
50
right out
years.
of my mouth?
Stop doing that. You are in that home. He thinks that's his home.
Correct.
He believes it's his. You believe it's his. He's got it by fiat. And now you have a choice.
What's the
Live
choice?
in misery for the rest of your life, or go on and buy a new home.
Okay, so that's what you would do?
Oh, okay. Is this about what
I'm saying if I take your house.
Right.
How many years?
Because I wanna know
how
that.
many years do you have to
No,
spend?
the reason I want to know
hating?
that is because I'll come
It's
take
time
your house
to give
tomorrow.
it up. It's time to let it go.
Okay, so let's follow that line because that's an interesting philosophical approach. And I'm not saying that you're wrong. I just want to probe it. Right?
I'm not saying you're wrong, but I'm
Right. No, I just want
that maybe you are wrong.
No. I just want to probe it because we're talking about human beings, right? So we started with the house, right? So now it's interesting what you're saying, and this is why I say I actually think this is a moral matter. Now,
It doesn't matter how many years you fight in hatred and
let me follow.
fear and loathing.
Follow
you're
me.
morally superior.
Now follow
Therefore,
me.
hold on to that.
No moral superiority here.
Well, then it's
It's a moral.
Then why is that moral?
It's a moral
outweighing
spiritual
the
matter.
reality.
Well, because of this, and here's where it gets confusing. You said, and I'm saying, you might be right. You put at the table.
That's a lawyer's trick.
No. You put on the table that if after 50 years you're the loser, and it's happened right here in America, the native indigenous people are on reservations in America, and so their game is up. You're right. After 150 years or so, sorry guys, you're done. You're toast. Go on with your life and make the best of it. Okay, fine. But the confusing thing in this particular conflict is that Israel is the product of someone saying 1,200 years ago, we lost, but doesn't matter. We're going to come back 1,200 years later, and this is ours. So you're asking the Palestinians to do what the Israelis weren't willing to do 1,200 years later.
Well, let's revisit this question 1,200 years
No, let's not
from
leave
now.
that.
Let's revisit this question for the Palestinians.
You see how confused it could get?
No, it's not confusing.
Yes, go ahead. Clear it up for us.
You're confusing.
Because you're telling somebody to forget something that happened 50 years ago, but the Israelis weren't ready to let it go 1,200 years later.
Yeah, they never were.
Everybody, okay. So here we are arguing.
So I said
here
it
we
was
are
a moral
arguing
question.
the Palestinian and Israeli claim to land, and look,
it's a moral
The
question.
Palestinians can have that section of God. It can be their state, right? Were they moved and just you depending on what side you are, they were moved forcibly by the Israelis, or from the Israelis' point of view, a war came and they had to basically move everybody
We're just
out.
really talking about stability. We don't have to take either side. I'm just saying, what's the stability?
I honestly think.
How do you get? Because what's going on now is not stability.
Well, that's
Stability.
for sure.
If Hamas needs to surrender, they are terrorists. They have massacred 1,400 Israelis in their beds. They tied families together and burned them alive. There is no excuse.
Well, taking
for
all that as true, which some people might claim that
it's
it's
an
not.
overwhelming reality. It changes the ground.
Okay, and how ground changing is it? So I want to get to the stability. How ground changing is it that almost 10,000 people, women, children, defenseless people, are burned and dismembered by the Israelis?
Israel has allowed the Gazans to leave Gaza City.
Well, how are 10,000 dead?
Because first of all, I would disagree with the count of 10,000.
Why?
But let's just agree it's a 500. It's 500 innocent civilians. You can't let that stop you. If that was the case, then Germany...
Well, maybe the Palestinians felt the same way. That you just said. You just said the Israelis can't let the killing of innocent civilians stop them. Maybe that was the Palestinian calculation.
In what way, shape, or form is murder, chopping the head off of a baby
different than taking it off with a bomb?
Or burning it in an oven with themselves? They themselves did this on that Saturday morning.
Well, see, this is
and
language.
now there's an Israeli drone hovering over a particular known terrorist hotspot in the middle of a hospital.
Correct.
And warning them to leave. And if they
Correct.
don't leave right now, we're going to blow it up and then blow it up.
And that's...
How is that the same? It's not the same. They're morally different completely.
They're morally different.
Completely.
And what's the moral difference?
The moral difference is one is barbaric and the other one is a just reality of war.
Wow. Okay.
Okay, are you wowing about the barbarism that was committed by Hamas?
I'm wowing about, remember, I started off saying that what we're watching is savagery. I didn't say whether it was Palestinian or Israel.
Well, then there's the confusion right there that needs to be got to the bottom of.
Go ahead.
One is barbaric, the other one is war.
Okay, so it's war, you're saying, to knowingly and deliberately kill defenseless civilians.
Now, this is an interesting situation because now I remember you're reading the piece from Bertrand Russell last podcast, and
Yes.
in that it was a whole full-throated defense against war of all sorts, a pacifist, as it were. So you are
Bertrand
a pacifist.
Russell?
Bertrand Russell. That was the end-all, be-all of the piece that you read.
Actually, Bertrand Russell was I wouldn't call him a pacifist.
That article that you read certainly was pacifistic.
Actually, all he spoke about was that what you're speaking about. He said for the stability of that region and for the world at large, that simple principles needed to be recognized. And if those simple moral principles were recognized, there would be peace.
And elucidate give me one of those principles.
His simple principle was, I guess, if I would boil it down, is that the process in the Middle East involving Israel and the Palestinians could be best described as a process of colonial expropriation of
now,
indigenous
that
people's
term
land.
Colonial and indigenous is the beginning of a big old right now argument about what colonialism means. And if you want to undo colonialism, we're all going to have to disappear
he didn't argue
into the
that.
myths of time,
But
because colonialism is all we have ever been.
Correct. But his statement was, recognizing what you just said, given this modern world we live in the closeness of this most recent colonial endeavor, he said, hey, all right, Israel exists. Nothing we should do about that. It should continue to exist. But we need to set right the dispossession of the colonized people. And we need to, his argument was you need to stop jerking them around and immediately move to establishing the Palestinian nation state alongside Israel. And let's move on in peace.
And I agree with him. We should establish a two-state solution.
Correct. But he said that 53
are you a
years
pacifist?
ago.
Are you against war in all those forms?
I just want to point out that he said
that helped me know
that note
who
that I
we're
read
talking
you
to.
was 53 years ago.
Yeah, I heard.
So that means in 53 years, nobody listened to him.
I got news for you. There are pacifists. There are pacifists
But it
who
has
believe
nothing to do with
that
pacifism.
all violence is wrong. And
Well, you asked me, was I a pacifist?
Are you a pacifist?
No.
So some war is just.
No, I think that's too extreme.
Yeah.
No, I think.
Do you want me to answer or no?
No, you answer. I'm sorry.
No. But you go ahead. I don't want to cut you off. I just want to make sure I'm preparing to answer.
I just want to say that that's the either or concept, and it's the either or way of being that has people polarized over this issue, and there's no middle ground. They don't see any middle ground because it's either or, and it's not either or. It's not either or. I mean, quite honestly, you need to put Hamas in a context. Let me ask you this question, and all of you, think of the American Revolution. Do you think that those first people, were considered revolutionary or terrorists? The
British said they were terrorists.
There you go. There you go.
And they treated them like that, by the way.
They were called terrorists. And do you think that every bullet that they fired was, a glorious firing for the United States motherland?
Actually, before we go to the British, you stay on the British.
Yeah, I'm just saying.
American Revolution.
American Revolution. And so these things in context, Hamas wasn't laying in waiting for the Jewish population to arrive. They weren't there then, but there were people. There were conflicts between Jews and Arabs. Thank you to the British. During
the same British?
During the Ottoman Empire, Jews lived in that region of the world in pretty much peace.
That's right.
They had
the Ottoman
businesses.
Empire had colonized that land.
The Ottoman Empire had colonized the land, but they did not there was not a...
They didn't dispossess the Palestinians from their land.
They didn't dispossess the
They
Jews.
were slaves.
They didn't dispossess...
They were slaves.
No, they just had to pay a tax.
Or die.
No,
everybody had to pay a tax. I mean, but my point being is that it's not so much... This is part of the smoke screen.
Was no heaven on earth.
Well, this is part of the smoke
That's a fair
screen.
statement.
The part of the smoke screen is that there's always been a war between Jews and Muslims. No, that's not the case.
That's not true.
Well, no, but it's part of the smoke screen because people will say,
Right.
"Well, they fought for hundreds of years."
Well, that's the idea of Hamas killing every Israeli. There's been no 1,000-year enmity between Jews and Muslims. In fact, it's been the opposite.
It's been the opposite.
Jews and Muslims have lived in peace and prospered together.
When the British stepped in, that's when things went haywire.
Uh-oh.
All over the world.
I'm serious.
When after the Spanish Inquisition, which you may or may not be familiar with, when Catholicism came back to power under Queen Isabella in 1492, a couple years before Columbus sailed.
He sailed in 1492.
Right. The last Muslim territory or community or government fell in southern Spain, the fall of Granada. Right?
Yep.
Within a short period of the fall of Granada, and by the way, southern Spain had been, quote, ruled by the Muslims for almost 8 centuries before then. But it then dissipated, and Jews had lived peacefully in that community alongside Christians, Muslims, and Jews. Lived and created tremendous things.
Yeah, the hate only arrived when Israel decided to reclaim its territorial land.
But
when the British stepped in, because
I just want to point
there were
out,
already Jews living.
In other words,
that
as long
area.
as the Jew and as long as you in that particular example, once you accepted the rule of the caliphate, you were fine. You paid a little extra money.
I do want to offer up that at shortly after the fall of Granada, the Catholic king and queen
the Spanish
expelled
Inquisition.
the Jews.
And if they didn't leave, they tortured
And guess
them.
where
Yes.
they went?
I don't know.
Guess where many of them went?
All over, I would guess. All over, I would guess.
Well, no. They large numbers of them went into Muslim lands in northern Africa.
Well, correct, because
And they were welcome.
The Muslims at that time controlled all the North African territories.
by the
they
way,
controlled
they were
Egypt.
welcomed.
They controlled the Israel area.
I just want to point out
So they had conquered that land.
welcomed.
They had conquered that land.
Actually, most of it was through trade.
But my point is that
they owned the land. They
my
conquered
point is
the
the
land.
Muslims welcomed these Jews, and they prospered
So you're
together.
I'm tempted to suggest that if the Israelis would just give the land back to the Muslims, then they could live and prosper in Muslim lands.
Why not?
Is that your
That's
idea?
interesting.
For peace?
It occurs to me. Is that my idea for peace? It sounds like it might be somebody's idea for peace.
No. I have not offered.
But I think the Israelis want their own land, their own.
Well, they
nation.
have it.
They do now. Yes.
You're correct.
They have
and
it.
and by the way, neither Hamas, that I'm familiar with, as of today, and we can forget Hamas. The Palestinian people, I think, have accepted, and they put that on paper, that they accept that Israel exists and that they won't be getting that land back.
And I would like to think, I believe the Hamas does not believe that. And I know that the protesters you see in the United States don't, because they carry the signs that say, from the sea to the river. And that means no Israel.
Well, these people...
That's an interpretation.
But that's an interpretation. These people are being...
That's
these people are being
that's fine.
inflamed. You might be right, Phil. You might be right.
What do you think it might mean?
You know what? I honestly believe that it's a reaction, and it's a knee-jerk reaction. You know what's
it's
interesting?
a slogan.
You know what's interesting? Okay, you want to talk about solutions. Let's just say the United States took that $15 billion, all right, and said, okay, Israel, here's $3 billion. We're going to give the rest to the West Bank residents so that they can establish businesses that were taken.
Now,
So
the West Bank is on the Jordan, right?
That's right. Exactly. And see, that's the other thing is that, there's just all kinds of smoke screens going on. Like Gaza has become a big issue. But in the meantime, in the West Bank, the money that the United States is sending to Israel to build up their armament is being used also to carry those guns into the West Bank and confiscate homes from Palestinians. So let's just say,
I don't know that the Israelis are taking or
they
creating enclaves in the West Bank.
Yes, that's what the settlements are.
You know what I come away from this.
I need to know more about that.
From this first 30 minutes.
Oh,
and I will confess, and this is just an observation I have. I don't think any of us in this room are in a position, nor do we have an obligation, to figure out how to make peace between Israelis and Palestinians.
You're awful right about that.
First of all, we don't have sufficient information. We have nothing at stake at that level and we don't have the facts, nor have we lived the horrors by either group as they would tell their story, right? But I do think as Americans and as human beings, we have a right to ask the question that we started with. What is the interest of the United States in that conflict?
Yeah, and I accept that. And as citizens, we have the right and the obligation, to the extent that we can, to inform ourselves as best we can,
correct,
to make our points known. And for that, I
so what
appreciate
are our
you.
interests?
Right. What are our interests?
All that, I think you said half an hour. It was more like an hour.
I like Israel.
And
we've
gone around and around and around and around.
I'd like to see them continue.
Where are we going with this? I mean, why do we care? What are the interests? It still brings us back. Stories and stories.
Can I offer up?
Sure. 14. You said 15 billion.
Yeah.
But go ahead.
I would like to kind of frame out that in the interest of this, myself as a citizen of the United States, I won't try to speak for anybody else. It would be in my best interest as an American citizen if my government were to conduct itself in a manner consistent with the highest principles of human morality.
What's easier, peace in the Middle East or our government behavior?
Right. Both of them are hard nuts to crack.
I'll nail it down further, because it doesn't. And if they can't do this, then we need to get rid of them.
I agree with that.
Whether they're Jewish, I'm talking about government leaders.
Yeah.
Buddhists, Muslim, Hindu, Zoroastrian, any of the revealed faiths, or they're agnostic and just had a good grandmother. But to conduct foreign policy in this region by a standard of justice and right and wrong that a child can figure out. This has been made up into so many stories and so many twists and turns, which none of us have the ability to figure out. But we all know, because we're all in this room, fortunate to have been raised or come into, whether it's mothers and fathers or aunts and uncles, whatever. We know what it is to steal or not steal. We know what it is to lie and not lie. We know what it is to kill justly and to kill unjustly. And if that's what our government should be operating by, not only in the Middle East, anywhere on earth.
Our government is a product of ourselves.
Isn't that interesting, Phil?
Yeah, absolutely. And so our government is as good as we are.
As good as we demand them to be. Or fail to demand.
Yeah.
Or let's not let him get away with that.
I think you go as far as you can go when you accept the reality that we get what we deserve.
Well, let's not get that far, because then that leaves us helpless, and it kind of condemns us when I don't think we deserve that condemnation.
No. It's a constant effort.
I think that our government,
I
think the government of the United States has been captured by money interest, by military interest, by power crazed interest,
political interest,
by political interest, and our government is not operating in our best interest. It cannot be in our best interest or in the interest of stability
to be $1.5 trillion in debt, in deficit.
Thank you, or to fail in a conflict like this, to take the position, you know what the first step is? Let's stop the killing. Because how can anybody work out something when you're killing each other? It's impossible. When the first step of the United States government is not to say, stop the killing, they're not operating in our interest. They're creating more instability. They're creating more enemies of the United States, which means me.
And that's a powerful political statement and point of fact from your point of view. And I would say to you, I hear you, and I say the killing stops when Israel's satisfied.
Well, notice what I said. Notice what I said. And Phil, you don't have to take that position. You might have just been saying it as a matter of fact, which I believe you're right.
No. I accept the fact that you honestly and wholeheartedly and sincerely believe your point of view. And you're a citizen of this country. And by God, you have a right to make your statement. You have a right to do your best to influence your desires. And I absolutely agree. But I
happen to agree implicitly with something you said, and it's kind of the horror of it all, is that the leadership of our government is so compromised and unable to do.
Well, what the government ought to say rather than stop the killing is that we are so screwed up, we don't know what to say. That probably would be a more honest answer.
But I agree with you that the situation is out of control. And that, by the way, I'm thinking of Americans myself. In the world we live in, talk about security and stability, that could spin tomorrow morning into you and I waking up and there be mushroom clouds on the horizon.
Absolutely.
That's how dangerous.
Yes, it is.
In the failure of leadership, moral leadership, in the interest of the United States.
Yep, these are at stake.
You and your family are at stake. You can forget the Palestinians.
Well, you just said mushroom cloud. That affects us all pretty much equally.
Yeah.
You can forget the Israelis.
With any luck, I'm located near Baltimore. I'm sure DC's going to go.
You can forget the F-16s. We are living in such an interconnected world that when violence is allowed to spin out of control, your very life
our
is at stake.
Our ATMs could stop working tomorrow, and it'd be about 3 weeks, and we would be in anarchy.
But that's the failure of American. We're into something either where we shouldn't be, or if we're going to be there, our leaders are failing to look out for the interest of America.
Of humanity, the interest of humanity.
I got news for you. Humanity is coming at us. We are doing our best to work with it. I mean, the world is coming at us fast.
It's interesting what Phil's saying, and I will kind of sign on to it. I think what you're saying, Phil, is that the world is a complex place.
It's not a crashing place.
It's not a paradise. It's a competition of interest, a competition of civilizations. I do want to say, though, or offer, that most of the world is like us. They want to have children. They want to grow old. They want to have adequate food to eat and be left alone.
Absolutely, everybody does. Yeah.
In most of the world, like the United States, unfortunately, like Israel, like the Palestinians, like many, many countries you can name, unfortunately, are being led by people who are leading them to problems.
But those people believe that they're not.
You mean the people in control?
The people, everybody thinks they're doing the right thing. That's the weird part.
Yeah,
Somebody does.
For their own interest.
Congratulate him.
Yeah.
Whatever that interest is.
Until such a
people.
time is, and this is where it's important that, they always say power to the people, but
Yes.
this is where it's important that the people exercise that power, because they're going to continue to do that
That's
until the body that voted them in tells them not.
We're being given monster after monster in America.
Yeah, or we're
Meaning,
taking them.
We started out, remember, and then I'm going to turn it to you, Chris.
Well, we're going to try to wrap this up, but go ahead.
Give me,
Yeah, sure.
Give me 3 minutes if I may.
All right, please.
Remember, in our lifetimes, in 2001, and this is very interesting and tragic, I think it was 2001, we woke up, I did, one day, and the TV,
9/11.
I didn't even know what it was saying, and my wife called me in, and eventually it all shook out, and I was able to piece it together. And then planes were flown into the
World Trade Center by, at the end, they said 19, 20 young Saudis, citizens, and tragic loss of life, horrible, innocent life. One thing that comes out of that that's quite interesting and connects to today is that in every one of the cases where you were able to uncover what one of these terrorists had left behind, including their putative leader, who was claimed to be Osama bin Laden, one of the major things they mentioned was the oppression of the Palestinian people by the United States participating in it. Was why they said they were willing to go down in flames.
Was that in their interest?
Let's not get to their interest.
Well, I mean,
I'm just
a moment
saying,
ago, it's
I'm
not
just
in
showing
America's
the connection.
national
I'm
interest.
just showing it to,
And
the
now
connection to today. We spin out of that by our leaders, attack Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, with the help of the Saudis, Yemen, create tremendous death and instability and hatred of the United States and loss of American life, an American fortune, an American treasure. And the amazing thing is, I'll close with this. Something that amazes me about all that tragedy and horror. When I was in Egypt and Saudi Arabia, I'll say two things. I got on a train from Mecca to Medina, which is about a 2.5-hour train ride in Saudi Arabia. The train traveled at times of speeds of up to 145 miles an hour. It's French technology, I believe, or German. And on that train ride, you know what kept going through my mind?
There's a lot of sand out there.
There was a lot of desert. I did say that to myself. But the other thing that went through my mind, we're being shafted. How is it possible that I'm in Saudi Arabia? I'm being told when I'm in America that the Saudis are savages and the Muslims hate everybody and they're all ass backwards and they got their women this and whatever. But I cannot ride a train this fast anywhere in America. That's what went through my mind.
Governor Newsom's building the high-speed train in California.
It'll never happen.
And it spent like $10 billion
And it's
on
not
it.
1 mile built.
I think they have. I think they do have a mile.
Okay, last I'll end with. Anytime I was in all that time I was in Saudi Arabia and in Egypt, which was almost 3 weeks, and I made it a point to get out where the people, right? Do you know that every time somebody knew I was from the United States, what do you think happened?
They said, "Hey, man, how you doing?"
Actually, they went further. And it was crazy because it kept happening. They said, "I love American people." American people, good, because some of their English was not perfect. American people, good. I love American people. It was crazy every time, 90% of the time. And then some of them would follow it up and say, American government, bad.
I'll give you 2 quick stories about Muslims. A friend of mine was in Pakistan a couple of times for about 6 months.
Yeah.
And he came back very impressed.
Yes.
Christian,
Yeah.
very impressed. He said, you could leave your wallet on a restaurant table the
And
day
that's the
before at
truth.
lunch. Come back the next
It's
day and that
true.
wallet would be there.
It'd be right there.
Yeah. The second story I want to tell is a friend of mine was in Saudi Arabia in 1983. He was a naval officer. And
Yes.
they had docked at one of the
Yes.
places, and he was wandering around one of the main, I don't know, something where there was a ship can dock. And he said all of a sudden a bunch of the Muslims, religious people started herding. He was in the bazaar,
Yes.
herded him to the square.
Yes.
And he didn't know what to do. He was a young naval officer. He just, I guess I got to go this way.
Oh, no,
He didn't want to go that way, but he had to go that way. And next thing, he's in a square. And then they brought out 6 people, and
Yes.
then they beheaded them.
Yes.
So,
Well,
2
that might
stories
explain
about,
the wallet.
2 stories
Right.
about goes a long way to explaining the wallet.
Right.
But in ending, I want to be very clear. I don't have a side. My side is my life, and our challenge, I believe, as human beings, is to be about justice
Yeah.
and to be about right and wrong.
Yeah.
That's, to me, the challenge that if we could better focus ourselves on and demand that of our leaders, we would, not that we would eliminate problems in the world, but we would bring it down.
But
a whole lot.
I tell you, and I would like to close with this. My hope, my fervent hope for the people of that region,
Yes.
is that there will be a time coming soon where every family can live in harmony with their brothers and their sisters.
That's right.
Where every child can
That's
eat
right.
and play and have fun and run
That's right.
free, and where men and women can deal with the tragedy that is life, whether you hate each other or not. There's going to be tragedy, and that they can deal with that with the belief and understanding that their friends and their neighbors want the best for them, and I know I do.
Well, I want that in America.
Me too.
Most of all.
Everywhere.
And I want it everywhere
Everywhere.
as well.
Me too.
But if it's not here, we got problems.
Good point. Don't know how it's going to happen.
So guys, you took us around all the way around the world and back
Yes.
to basically say, and I like what you said, no sides. I don't have a side either. I don't really know that much about it, enough about it, but I don't have a side. And sometimes I think we get caught up in needing to have a side.
That's right.
Yeah, like a
Well,
football
yeah.
game.
Yeah, like it's a game.
That's
Because
right.
we're very
We're-
competitive.
We're
Very
programmed
We want to
be
pick
that
a
way.
side.
Unfortunate game.
And quite frankly, to something that's so complicated, I don't see,
It's not
about having a side. I think it's more about stopping bloodshed and doing something that promotes
That's right.
humanity.
That's right.
Long life
That's right.
for humanity.
That's right.
For all.
For all.
The whole world.
Exactly.
That's right.
And I think if there's any enemies to this, special interest,
That's right.
picking sides,
That's right.
all those
Arms dealers.
arms dealers, all that kind of stuff
right.
we know is no good. So when
Right.
you
Who the
hear
biggest arms
when you
dealer is,
hear
right?
that as a follow-up or rebuttal
That's right.
or answer to
That's-
whatever situation, however tragedy it is,
That's right.
you know that I feel like they're not really speaking to our humanity. They're not
That's
really
right.
speaking to us as people.
That's right.
There must be a self-interest.
That's right.
Because you're just promoting
We're on a couch
and
in your beautiful
perpetuating.
home,
Yeah.
and those guys are literally hands around
That's
each other's
right.
necks. They are
right.
not.
That's right.
Oh, well, this is nice.
That's right.
They are in the
That's
middle
right.
of a blood struggle.
That's
No,
right.
I get it. I'm thank God. I
we
thank
aren't.
God every day that we aren't in that.
America
I'll
needs
be
a
honest.
Nelson Mandela.
How about that?
Yeah. Well, that's
Peace
an
for
interesting
all.
point because my wife agrees with something that you said earlier, which is, why aren't the Palestinians lifting themselves up in some kind of way? And I thought to myself, because there hasn't been as charismatic a leader as a Nelson Mandela amongst them that could reach across all ethnicities, at least that we don't know about. All right, now there may have been somebody.
Well,
who might have
remember,
gotten
though,
squashed.
Nelson Mandela was jailed for what?
Right.
For what, 25 years?
No. What was his crime?
Oh, I don't remember his crime.
He was a terrorist.
Ooh.
That's what they labeled him.
Well, he admitted that he was. Now, they labeled him a terrorist, but he confessed in open court, and very proud man, that he was justified to fight by whatever means necessary to liberate his people from the oppression that the whites or the government of South Africa had them under for decades. And he was labeled in court, you're right, as a terrorist.
Because he was willing.
And sentenced to life.
Yeah.
So I only say that he was a man of action, and he was a man of principle and of morals.
Yeah.
In the pursuit
Conviction.
of justice and peace.
Right.
Yeah.
You're right. He was a peacemaker. Yes.
But he was
Yeah.
willing to fight.
He was willing to fight, which
That's the
violence.
word. Can't say
moved-
fight.
Violence.
Can't say the word fight.
Yeah, so there's no person.
He was willing
either
to fight oppression.
Palestinian or Israeli, who's risen up, who wants to speak for all people, and that's an important step
That's correct.
to take.
That's right.
That there be a voice that speaks to the humanity, the string of humanity between all of them.
Between all.
Yeah, and there's nobody who's doing it. So you're gonna.
But I get the impression that whatever you do, somebody's going to take whatever you do and twist it
They're gonna try
to
to.
make it mean something
I
else.
mean, just like him, he said they called Mandela a terrorist.
Yeah.
Right there.
Right there.
Yeah.
So they're twisting it so that all the people who sided with the government did so because they felt like the government is protecting their interest.
And there's
Yeah.
one other
From
thing.
the terrorists.
You talked about.
Well, they were
Phil,
right.
But in closing,
It certainly overturned the government.
Phil, in closing, you talked about the
Yeah.
potential of the Palestinians. And
How are we gonna
And I know
close this?
I took after you, but again, you're not wrong. There are many Israelis who believe that the impossible, that the Palestinians can or want to kill them all. You're correct. But also coming from the Israeli side, there's this concept that, and you brought it up, well, what we need to do, guys, is we need to kill Hamas, and that's going to solve our problem. Well,
It won't solve the problem.
that's an impossibility as well.
Right.
You cannot kill an idea. You cannot kill a people's aspiration for justice. It's impossible.
Well, this is the beginning of our next 2-hour podcast.
Yeah. So guys, let's bring this to a close.
Yeah,
let's really, because we could go on and
done.
on and on. I think we're like an hour and a half. You guys know we're an hour and a half.
Yeah.
At least. So this has been great. You guys, obviously, this is something that you guys wake up thinking about. That's the first thing
That's sad.
when
That's
you're having your morning tea and coffee. But I think most of the people in America, what do you think? I don't think well, I don't want to speak for most of the people. In
Well,
America.
most of the people of America, most of the people of
Speak
America.
for Chris.
Yeah. I'll be honest. I don't wake up thinking about it. It's on. I hear it on the news or something. I don't really watch the news that much, or I'll see it on a feed, or I'll.
That's right.
And there's sadness that sweeps across me on both sides. The fact that humans are dying. I don't really go into, it's Israel, it's Hamas, it's Palestinians. That there's in some part of the world there's bloodshed.
That's right.
And there's got to be a reason. There's got to be a reason to not do that. Like one another has to look at the other and have the same love and respect that they have for themselves, and want to be willing to not do the status quo, because it doesn't seem like it's gotten them anywhere. It's been the same cycle, same cycle. And you said this, and I believe everyone in this room feels that way, that we don't wake up feeling that. That's not us.
Right.
We generally want a good life.
That's right.
Children to live long.
That's
good,
right.
Want for my neighbor as I want for myself. Short is occasional road rage and things like that.
That's right. And you got,
but I think overall people, especially us, I mean, we don't have that much to argue about. I mean, taxes, we want this, but in contrast to what's happening in other parts of the world,
that's right.
It's nothing.
We're blessed.
And so I oftentimes wonder why is it, this happens in one part of the world, why the, Europeans enslave, African people and Indian people. And there's all kinds of stories. It's not, just didn't start there.
That's right.
This has been going on and on and on and on. But yet and still, I travel, and I know you guys have had chances to travel.
Right.
Every time I travel and I meet different people around the world, I go somewhere, I can't tell you how overjoyed I am to be in that culture, to learn about them, to be friends and gain a better understanding about them, but not just about them, but about humanity as a whole. That's wow, right. There's something bigger than me, that bigger than what I can fathom on a day-to-day basis. And I'm overwhelmed with happiness that I get to witness this, that there's a higher being, a God that allows me to behold all this, right?
That's right.
So I'm humbled by it.
That's right.
But I'm also saddened. So I know we've talked about this, and there doesn't seem to be, we know there's interest. There are people that have interest, and there are people who want to fight, and the world goes around and around and around. I don't have a side, but I thank people for taking the time out to listen to this hour and a half podcast.
Yes.
And I thank you guys for coming on and really sharing generously your thoughts about such a complex.
Yeah, and good job to you and Omar, because I think what you're doing is really valuable.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Phil.
man. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Larson.
Yeah.
Hey, Greg. Vance Gragg, thank you for joining us.
Well, thank
Omar.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you to all our lucky listeners out there.
All our lucky listeners.
Appreciate and enjoy this hour and a half of Not Your Common Conversation, and we'll be catching up to you guys in 2 weeks.
Okay, assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum.
Also,
peace.
please continue.
Yeah, I figured it was Muslim.
Peace. And I want people to go out there. Please continue to listen, guys. Like us wherever you get your podcasts. This particular podcast, we're going to put it up on YouTube. So start tuning into YouTube, and thank you for listening.